Millionaire arrived to pick up his daughter from his ex-wife's residence, but after waiting for an extended period with no response, he grew concerned. Upon reaching her high-rise apartment and letting himself in, a peculiar noise emanating from the bathroom piqued his curiosity. When he stepped to the door, the sight of his daughter hunched over and holding her stomach within the restroom shocked him, but the startling reality that followed. Lucas Sterling stood frozen at the ornate entrance of the high-end Manhattan penthouse, patiently pressing the doorbell for the third time. The October rain outside lashed against the hallway glass, reflecting the millionaire's face, which was tightening with apprehension. His watch read 3:15. He was 15 minutes past the agreed-upon pickup time, yet Isabella hadn't brought their daughter Sophie down to the lobby. His phone buzzed in his tailored vest pocket. Lucas answered, hearing the thick, slurred, and disjointed voice characteristic of someone heavily under the influence on the other end. "The door's unlocked. Just come in and get her yourself. I'm tied up right now." Lucas frowned, disconnected the call, and firmly pushed open the heavy oak door. The moment he stepped into the foyer, a pungent odor assaulted his senses, causing him to instinctively wince and step back. It was the sour smell of stale leftover wine mingled with the stagnant air of a room that had been sealed up for too long. The expansive living room was submerged in a dim gloom. The curtains were completely drawn despite the midday sun. Scattered across the pristine white sheepskin rug were empty wine bottles. Isabella, the woman who meticulously cultivated the image of a flawless, wholesome mother, was sprawled out on a velvet sofa. She wore nothing but a carelessly tied silk dressing gown, her hand loosely holding a glass of red wine, her makeup smeared across a face etched with the exhaustion of late-night socializing. "Where is Sophie?" Lucas asked, his voice icy, trying to suppress the disgust rising in his chest. Isabella squinted laboriously, waving a hand toward the deep winding hallway that led to the bedrooms. "In the restroom. She's doing her detox regimen. Don't bother her. It's really important." Lucas ignored the comment, moving swiftly past the clutter on the floor. As he ventured deeper into the corridor, the silence grew heavier, overriding the sound of the rain outside. There was no laughter or playful sounds of a child, only a chilling stillness. He paused before the slightly ajar bathroom door at the end of the hall, where a faint yellow light seeped out. Lucas gently pushed the door open and stepped in. The sight before him felt like a powerful hand clutching his heart. In the corner of the cold, marble-tiled bathroom, Sophie was curled up on the floor. She wore a flimsy, long-sleeved shirt, her head tucked into her knees. The little girl clutched her abdomen tightly, her whole body shaking in violent spasms, her back arched like a tiny shrimp trying to withstand intense physical distress. "Good heavens, Sophie!" Lucas rushed forward, dropping to his knees on the tiled floor. Sophie slowly lifted her head. Her face was paper white, completely drained of color. Her dry lips moved, but no sound emerged. Recognizing her father, the constant fear in her eyes softened slightly, replaced by a look of painful endurance. "Daddy, you're here," Sophie whispered, her breath weak in the cold air. Lucas touched her forehead. It was ice cold. He quickly removed his expensive suit jacket, draped it entirely over Sophie, and scooped her up. She felt frighteningly light in his arms, her body mass alarmingly low for a 7-year-old. But as Lucas cradled her, his hand inadvertently touched her lower abdomen beneath the thin fabric. It was stiff and distended, a stark contrast to her bony, frail frame. Without another word, Lucas carried his daughter out of the apartment, leaving the woman asleep on the sofa without a backward glance. The elevator descent to the parking garage was filled with suffocating silence. Lucas placed Sophie gently in the back seat of the Range Rover, carefully fastening her seatbelt and adjusting her to the most comfortable position possible. "I'm taking you to the doctor immediately. Just hold on a little longer, sweetheart," Lucas said, his voice trembling as he started the engine. The vehicle bolted out of the garage, merging into the heavy New York traffic under the pouring rain. Sophie sat motionless in the back, her hands still pressed to her abdomen, her eyes tightly shut. Suddenly, The vehicle jolted violently as a wheel hit a waterlogged pothole that Lucas failed to avoid. The impact caused Sophie to bounce slightly off the seat. Instantly, a piercing, muffled cry tore through the quiet cabin, carrying the culmination of deep, suppressed anguish. Lucas slammed on the brakes, quickly pulling the SUV over to the emergency lane, ignoring the blaring horns behind him. He unbuckled his seatbelt and whirled around to the back seat. "What's wrong? Where does it hurt?" The little girl looked at Lucas with wide, panicked eyes, her breathing rapid and shallow, like someone drowning grasping for a lifeline. "Daddy, help me. It's starting again." Lucas leaned into the back, his hands shaking as he lifted her shirt to check. Sophie's delicate abdominal skin was stretched taut, crisscrossed with distinct faint blue veins, and beneath the skin, strange, unsettling masses were shifting. They were rising and falling, churning like violent waves writhing incessantly. Sophie gripped Lucas's wrist tightly, her fingernails digging deep into his skin, whispering through tears and absolute terror. "Daddy, my tummy is moving." A surge of protective fury and horror simultaneously overwhelmed Lucas's composure. He gritted his teeth, returned to the driver's seat, and the engine roared with raw aggression. It sliced through the torrential rain, speeding into the night, heading straight for the emergency lights of the nearest medical center, beginning a desperate race for his daughter's life. The Range Rover skidded up onto the sidewalk outside the Mount Sinai Medical Center emergency entrance, braking sharply and leaving dark tire marks on the wet pavement. Lucas flung open the car door, lifting the now semi-conscious Sophie into his arms, and rushed toward the automatic glass doors. The stark white fluorescent lights of the hospital were a jarring contrast to the dreary rain outside. Lucas didn't shout, but his frantic appearance and soaking wet expensive suit immediately drew the attention of security and the triage nurses. "My daughter needs urgent care, severe abdominal pain, and strange movements beneath the skin." Two nurses immediately brought a gurney over. Lucas placed Sophie down his hand, trembling as he brushed the... Sophie was now too weak even to whimper. Her face had taken on a grayish-blue tint, and her breathing was shallow and hurried. Lucas tightly held his daughter's cold hand, running alongside the gurney down the hallway. "Daddy's here, Sophie. I'm right here." But at the door to the diagnostic imaging suite, a nurse stopped him. "Sir, you have to wait outside. We need space to work." Lucas stood rooted before the closed door, staring at the opaque glass. Every minute in the cold waiting area felt like an eternity. He pulled out his phone, intending to call the family's private physician, but his shaking hands kept dialing the wrong number. 30 minutes later, the door opened. The chief of surgery, a middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses, emerged. He didn't meet Lucas's eyes immediately, but looked down at the charts in his hand, his expression severe. When he finally looked up, his gaze was no longer the concern of a healer, but the cautious, mixed with revulsion look of someone facing a potential offender. "Are you Lucas Sterling?" "Yes, I am. How is she, doctor? What's the matter?" Lucas stepped closer, his voice strained with worry. The doctor took a step back, maintaining a safe distance. He held up an X-ray film against the viewing light on the hallway wall. "We detected a massive obstruction in the patient's stomach and small intestine. It is dense and quite large, posing a risk of bowel damage and septic shock. We must perform surgery immediately to remove the foreign object." Lucas let out a ragged breath relief, creeping in that they had at least found the cause. "Then do it now. Whatever the cost, save her." He reached for a pen in his jacket pocket, ready to sign any. He stared intently at Lucas, his voice cold. "This object is not naturally occurring. It is the result of long-term accumulation. Do you know what your daughter has been ingesting?" "I don't know. I picked her up from her mother's house 30 minutes ago," Lucas replied quickly. Confusion beginning to mount. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Just then, the atmosphere in the emergency lobby shifted. Two uniformed NYPD officers entered briskly from the main entrance, followed by a plainclothes detective. They walked directly toward Lucas. The doctor pointed at Lucas. That's him. The detective stepped forward, placing a hand on Lucas's arm just as he was about to press the doctor for an explanation. A temporary detention order was held up before him. Lucas Startling, you are being detained for questioning regarding assault and willful harm to a minor. Lucas froze, the pen in his hand clattering to the tiled floor. He looked at the detective, then at the doctor, feeling like he had fallen into an absurd nightmare. Are you out of your minds? My daughter is in there awaiting surgery. I'm the one who brought her here. Your ex-wife, Ms. Isabella Startling, called 911 immediately after you left the apartment, the detective stated flatly without emotion. She reported that you entered the home in an agitated state and forcibly removed the child. She also provided medical records suggesting you have a history of psychological instability, often forcing the child to ingest non-food items during previous visitations as a means of retaliation against her. That's fabricated, Lucas roared, blood rushing to his face. She was intoxicated. She left the child neglected in the bathroom. Can't you see how frail the child is? We will investigate everything. But currently, based on the victim's critical condition and the initial statement, you are not permitted near the child. The detective motioned to his subordinates. The two officers advanced, twisting Lucas's arms behind his back. He struggled in desperation, not from physical pain, but because his eyes were fixed on the gurney that was just wheeled out of the imaging room and moved toward the operating suite. The operating room doors swung open. Sophie lay there, tiny and isolated amidst the complex web of tubes and wires. She was not yet fully anesthetized. Her eyes fluttered weakly, searching. Sophie, I didn't do that. I will save you, Lucas shouted, straining to reach his daughter, but his strength was no match for the officer's firm grip. The nurses quickly pushed the gurney inside. The operating room doors slowly closed, blocking Lucas's view and severing the last link between father and daughter. Utter helplessness consumed Lucas. He was one of the most powerful men on Wall Street, a man who could command the flow of capital with a single phone call. Yet now he was unable to shield his own small daughter. Isabella had set a flawless trap, turning his concern into criminal evidence and transforming his efforts to save his child into an act of abduction. The dry, metallic sound of handcuffs clicking shut around Lucas's wrists echoed. Simultaneously, the in-surgery light above the operating room doors glowed a bright red, signaling that his daughter's intense struggle for survival had begun, a struggle he was forced to watch from the sidelines. The temporary holding room at Mount Sinai Medical Center didn't resemble a jail, but its oppressive atmosphere felt exactly like an iron cage. Lucas sat there, his hands still cuffed to the chair railing. The rhythmic clinking of the metal every time he made the slightest movement was a bitter reminder of his current predicament. Every second dragged on like in Lucas's mind, the image of the operating room doors closing replayed like a faulty film reel. He didn't know how Sophie was faring. Was she in pain? Would the doctors be quick enough? The helplessness gnawed at his sanity far worse than the legal peril. The waiting room door swung open. Attorney Stone entered. The man in his 50s, with meticulously styled silver hair and a sharp-tailored suit, exuded the authority of someone well-versed in New York legal battles. I need a private consultation with my client, right now. A young police officer started to speak, but Stone raised a hand, cutting him off with a decisive gesture. Attorney-client privilege. You know the rules. Unless you want me to call the police commissioner and complain about Mr. Startling's constitutional rights being violated right here in the hospital. The two officers exchanged glances, then reluctantly nodded. They uncuffed Lucas and exited, closing the door behind them. That's Rutherford. They're preparing the paperwork, Lucas, Stone said, sitting across from him, his voice low and steady. Isabella was very thorough. She has psychiatric records asserting you have underlying tendencies toward volatility. We need contradictory evidence, and we need it fast. Lucas rubbed his wrists where red marks were visible. His eyes did not waver from the accusations. Give me the phone, Stone raised an eyebrow, but didn't question him. He pulled the smartphone from his inside jacket pocket, unlocked it, and slid it across the table. Lucas grabbed at his finger, swiftly scrolling through the contacts, until he found a name he hadn't called in 6 months. Martha. The phone rang for a long time. Lucas held his breath. If anyone knew the truth about what happened behind the closed doors of the Hamptons mansion, it would be Martha. She had cared for Sophie since birth, before being abruptly dismissed by Isabella. Hello. The shaky, Martha, it's Lucas. Silence hung on the line for a moment, then a burst of sobbing erupted. Mr. Lucas. Oh my heavens, I just saw the news. The police said you were taken into custody. Little Sophie, how is she? She's in surgery, Martha. I need your help. I need the truth, Lucas said, fighting to keep his voice from breaking. Why did Isabella dismiss you? What was happening with Sophie's meals? A sniffle came through the phone. Martha seemed to be struggling to calm herself and search her memory. The madam. She was obsessed, Mr. Lucas. She weighed the child every morning and every night. If the number even nudged up an ounce, she'd lose control. She forbade me from feeding the child anything beyond pured green vegetables. Lucas tightened his grip on the phone. But what else, Martha? The child is thin, but her stomach was bloated. She ingested something. I'm not entirely sure, Martha hesitated. But there was something peculiar. You know how the madam always boasted about using only natural cosmetics, never heavy makeup? Yet every week she ordered dozens of boxes of cotton pads and makeup sponges. I was the one who received the deliveries. And then I noticed them disappearing. Disappearing. Yes, I'd tidy Sophie's room, and sometimes I'd find small, clean wads of cotton underneath the bed or tucked into the child's pocket. At first I thought she was just playing around, but when I went to discard them, the child would panic and snatch them back. She said they were fluffy snacks her mother gave her. A horrifying realization flashed through Lucas's mind. Disconnected, illogical pieces began to arrange themselves into a terrifying picture. He remembered the car ride, how desperately Sophie had eyed the box of cookies, but recoiled in fear, and that stiff, oddly moving abdomen as if waves were churning inside. Thank you, Martha. Lucas hung up, pushing the phone back toward Stone. He shot up, moving toward the corner of the room where Sophie's worn backpack lay discarded on the floor. The police had confiscated his personal effects, but they hadn't yet sealed the child's bag, deeming it irrelevant evidence. Cover me, Lucas instructed simply. Stone understood. He stood up, turning his back to the glass window, using his large frame to block the view from outside, creating a small blind spot. Lucas knelt on the floor, his hands trembling as he unzipped the backpack. The interior was pitifully empty. No coloring books, no toys, no change of clothes. Only a small, clear plastic Ziploc bag lay crumpled at the bottom. Lucas pulled it out. Inside the bag was a single crumpled wad of cotton, damp and tinged a pale yellow. It didn't look like ordinary medical cotton. It was soft and sticky. A pungent aroma hit Lucas's nostrils. Not disinfectant. It was the distinct sour-sweet scent of citrus. The smell of concentrated orange juice that had begun to ferment slightly. Lucas closed his eyes, a wave of nausea rising in his throat. He understood everything now. Cotton, a highly absorbent material. When soaked in orange juice, it would soften, taste sweet, and easily deceive the palate of a starving child. Once swallowed, the cotton fibers would absorb stomach acid, swelling many times their original size, creating an immediate sensation of fullness without providing any calories. Fluffy snacks. That's the name an innocent child would give this. Isabella hadn't starved her child in the conventional sense. She had devised a sophisticated method of torture, forcing the child to consume non-food items to maintain a desired figure, to satisfy her own sickening obsession. These cotton masses were indigestible. They accumulated, binding together, churning in Sophie's intestines every time her stomach contracted, creating the movements he had witnessed. He gripped the Ziploc bag tightly, his fingernails digging into his palm. That woman wasn't a mother. She was a monster, hiding behind a mask of perfection. "Stone," Lucas said, his voice deep but containing a terrifying power. "Assemble the best private investigation team. I want every trash receptacle in the Hamptons turned upside down tonight." Stone looked at his client, recognizing the change in Lucas's eyes. It was no longer the look of a defensive victim. It was the look of a father ready to burn the world down to protect his child. "Understood. I'll call." Stone's sentence was cut short as the waiting room door was aggressively pushed open. Both men turned. The surgeon stood in the doorway. His blue scrubs were speckled with dark spots, and his mask was pulled down, revealing a face of extreme gravity. He didn't look at the police or the lawyer. He looked straight at Lucas. In his hand was a metal tray covered with... "The operation is finished." The doctor's voice was hoarse from fatigue and stress. "The child is temporarily out of immediate danger. But Mr. Sterling, you need to see this. The police need to see this right now." The doctor walked to the table, placing the tray down right next to Lucas's hand. His hand hesitated for a second before grasping the corner of the white cloth. "Prepare yourself," he said softly. "In 30 years of practice, I have never seen anything like this inside a child." Lucas and the officers quickly assembled to hear the doctors announce a worrying decision. "This is the Bezoar mass we removed from Sophie," the doctor explained, trying to maintain a professional demeanor, but clearly betraying his disgust. "It consists of non-digestible cellulose fibers and synthetic sponge material. It completely blocked the digestive tract, causing damage to a section of the intestine. The odor, it strongly smells of fermented citrus." He saw the pain the night Sophie must have spent clutching her stomach in agonizing hunger and the innocent trust she placed in her mother as she swallowed each poisonous snack. "Cotton," Lucas whispered, his voice cracking. She was feeding the child cotton soaked in orange juice. The police officer by the door turned pale, covering his mouth. Even Stone, the Iron Man of the legal world, had to look away. The evidence was too brutal, too raw. It wasn't a vague accusation. It was the physical embodiment of abuse. "I will retain this as medical evidence," the doctor said, replacing the jar lid. "The police will need my surgical report. Mr. Sterling, if what you say is true, then I apologize for my previous attitude." An hour later, Stone finalized the complex legal. With the law firm's guarantee and the new details from the doctor, Lucas was released pending investigation, but he was required to wear an electronic monitoring ankle bracelet and forbidden from leaving the New York metropolitan area. "You should go home and rest, Lucas. We have a lot of work ahead of us tomorrow," Stone advised as they exited the hospital's back entrance to avoid reporters. "I'm not going home," Lucas replied. "Isabella is sleeping soundly in a warm bed while my child just endured a major surgical procedure. I won't wait until tomorrow." He turned to Stone. "Call Cooper's detective team. Tell them to meet me on the Long Island Expressway. We're going to the Hamptons right now." 3 o'clock in the morning in the Hamptons. The exclusive resort community was immersed in the peaceful sleep of the ultra-wealthy. But in the communal refuse area, 2 miles from Isabella's mansion, the atmosphere was quite different. The private detective team of 4 men in black attire equipped with high-powered flashlights worked silently. The strong stench of decaying food waste was pungent, a stark contrast to the neighborhood's typical opulence. Lucas stood there, his expensive suit jacket stained with mud, his Italian leather shoes sinking into piles of plastic bags. He wasn't just directing. He was personally tearing open every black trash bag marked from Isabella's address. "Find anything?" Lucas asked, his voice rough. "Over here, sir," a detective called loudly from the other side of the container. Lucas quickly walked over. Under the shimmering flashlight beams, the detective held up a bundle of crumpled paper and mangled cardboard boxes. Lucas took them. They were the packaging for the Pure Cotton brand, the most premium organic cotton pads on the market. Not just one box, dozens of empty containers were scattered throughout the trash bag. Along with them were periodic Amazon order invoices addressed to Isabella Sterling. The quantity of cotton she purchased over 3 summer months was enough to supply a professional spa, not just one woman who constantly preached about natural beauty. "Photograph everything. Don't miss a single scrap," Lucas ordered. "Mr. Sterling, the target's vehicle," Cooper, the lead detective, spoke over the radio. "We've located her Bentley parked in the open garage area behind the house. Looks like she forgot to close the door." "Check the car," Lucas said. "Isabella has a habit of tossing things she's tired of into her car to donate or discard later." The detective team moved quickly and quietly like shadows. They approached the luxury vehicle. Flashlights swept across the cream leather interior. Lucas's phone vibrated incessantly in his pocket, breaking the somber moment. He wiped his eyes and pulled out his phone. It was an urgent notification from news apps. On the screen, Isabella's tear-streaked face filled the frame. She was live streaming on morning television. The headline below ran in bright red, "Lucas Sterling's ex-wife alleges abuse, calls for justice for little Sophie." In the video, Isabella sobbed uncontrollably, perfectly, performing the role of the distressed mother. "He took my baby. He was always jealous of the love Sophie has for me. Please, everyone, help me save my daughter." Lucas stared at the screen. The grief in his eyes slowly dissipated, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve, more frightening than any outburst of rage. He slowly stood up his hand, still clutching the doll filled with moldy food. He turned to Cooper, his voice low, but every word distinct. "Collect everything. Package it carefully. We are not just going to win the case. We are going to put her in prison." And this time, Lucas held the weapon Isabella never anticipated, the brutal truth concealed within the belly of a torn doll. Lucas decisively switched off the wall-mounted television in his temporary home office, plunging the room into a heavy silence. The last image before the screen went dark was Isabella's tearful face on national television. She was wearing an immaculate white silk dress, sitting opposite one of America's most popular morning show hosts, her shoulders visibly trembling as she recounted the agony of a single mother. "He was always too busy with numbers." Isabella had said, her voice choked, but every word carefully calculated. A flawless script. Isabella had positioned herself as the victim, painted Sophie as having psychological issues, and portrayed Lucas as a ruthless millionaire using his power to bully his ex-wife. "The corporation's stock is down 8% since the broadcast this morning," Stone said, setting a stack of documents. Lucas's private attorney remained composed, but the crease between his eyebrows was deeper than usual. "Partners in London are requesting an emergency meeting. Public opinion is siding with her, Lucas. We are under attack on all fronts." Lucas stood up, walking toward the window overlooking the bustling Manhattan street. He didn't care about the stock. He didn't care about his tarnished reputation. All that mattered now was the image of the doll with its belly slit open and the fragments of moldy cookies. "They can take all my money, Stone," Lucas said without turning around, "but they will never touch my daughter again. Is the filing ready?" Stone tapped his finger gently on the thick folder on the table. "The countersuit against Isabella Sterling for severe child abuse and willful infliction of injury is ready to be filed with the New York Supreme Court. We have Martha's testimony, the physical evidence of the doll, and the medical records from the surgery. But I must warn you, this is going to be a nasty fight. She will drag every detail of your private life into the courtroom." "File it," Lucas turned back his eyes, burning with cold determination. "And demand the court issue an emergency measure, an independent forensic examination of the foreign mass from Sophie's abdomen. I want science to speak for us." That afternoon, Lucas arrived at Mount Sinai Hospital. Although the restraining order was still in effect, the intervention of his legal team and Sophie's medical status allowed him a supervised visit with a social worker present. Sophie had been moved to the pediatric intensive care recovery room. She lay small amidst the layers of white blankets, an IV drip taped to her frail hand. Lucas pulled a chair up next to the bed, attempting a gentle smile to reassure her. On the bedside table was a glass of water and a bowl of Sophie, are you thirsty? The doctor said you need a little water to recover quickly. Lucas held the glass of water out toward her. Sophie's reaction was heart-wrenching. She recoiled, pressing her back against the headboard. Her large eyes looked at the glass in her father's hand as if it were poison. No, Sophie shook her head, her voice weak but full of panic. Drinking water causes bloating. Mommy said water makes people gain weight. I don't want to gain weight. If I gain weight, you won't love me anymore. Lucas firmly placed the glass on the table, spilling some water. He grabbed his daughter's small hand, holding it tight to stop her trembling. Listen to me, Sophie. I love you no matter what. Thin or heavy, you are my daughter. Your mother was wrong. But Sophie's eyes were still dull with Isabella's psychological manipulation was deeply ingrained in the child's subconscious, leaving invisible scars more painful than the surgical incision on her abdomen. Just then, the quiet hospital hallway was disrupted. The clicking sound of high heels echoed, accompanied by the rapid-fire shutters of cameras. Lucas looked through the window of the door. Isabella was approaching, surrounded by 2 large bodyguards and a small film crew she called her documentary team. She had swapped her white dress from the morning for a discreet black outfit, clutching a giant teddy bear, her face-pale makeup highlighting her role as the distraught mother visiting her child. Lucas shot up quickly, stepping out of the room and closing the door firmly behind him. He stood squarely in front of the entrance arms, crossed, forming a solid human wall. Isabella's entourage stopped. She removed her sunglasses, giving Lucas a sharp, challenging look, but managed a strained smile for the Move aside, Lucas. The court hasn't revoked my visitation rights. I'm here to see how my daughter is doing after you put her through this ordeal. You are not stepping through this door, Lucas said, his voice low but carrying a clear threat that made the cameramen lower their equipment. Sophie just fell asleep, and I will not allow you to bring this circus in here to disturb her. Isabella stepped closer, lowering her voice for Lucas only. You think you can win? I have millions of followers. I'm a mother. You are just a divorced man. Your countersuit is nothing but trash paper. We shall see, Lucas replied without blinking. Enjoy the spotlight while you can, Isabella, because the curtain is about to fall. Isabella paused slightly at Lucas's terrifying composure. She smirked a meaningful, veiled smile, then turned to speak loudly to the camera. You see, everyone, he is preventing a mother from seeing her child. But I will not give up. She turned and walked away, her noisy entourage following. Lucas stood watching her until she disappeared around the corner of the hallway, his hands clenched so tightly his nails dug into his skin. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a text from Stone. Good news. The court approved the request for independent forensic examination. The prosecution is also joining. Isabella cannot block this now. Meet me at the Forensic Institute at 4 p.m. Lucas let out a breath, feeling a 1,000-pound weight lift from his shoulders. He turned back and looked through the window of the patient room. Sophie was sleeping soundly from exhaustion, her hand still gripping the edge of the blanket. I promise, Lucas whispered through the glass. I will expose the truth. Precisely at 4 p.m., Lucas stood outside the State Forensic Examination Office. Stone was already waiting with a representative from the district attorney's office. A few moments later, Isabella's Bentley pulled up. The heavy metal door of the lab opened, releasing a rush of cold air and the distinct smell of chemicals. Lucas and Isabella walked in together, facing each other across a long metal table. In the center, the glass jar containing the foreign mass, removed from Sophie's abdomen, was prominently placed under a bright light, waiting to voice the truth, promising to shatter all the superficial lies. The atmosphere in the forensic examination room was tense like a taut wire ready to snap. The whirring of the ventilation fan was the only sound disrupting the suffocating silence. Dr. Aris, the state's leading forensic expert, stood before a large projection screen, meticulously adjusting his glasses. Next to him were the district attorney's representative, the two opposing lawyers, and Lucas and Isabella facing each other like opposite poles of a magnet. Lucas stared at Isabella. She stood with her arms crossed, her chin tilted up, conveying an air of boredom, as if her precious time was being wasted. "Shall we begin?" Dr. Aris's voice was even yet carried the weight of scientific authority. He pressed a button. The large screen behind him displayed a magnified image thousands of times larger of the foreign mass extracted from Sophie's stomach. The tangled woven fibers looked like a haunting piece of abstract art. "This is the result of the physical structure analysis." Dr. Aris used a laser pointer to indicate points on the screen. "This bezoar mass is composed of 100% pure cellulose fibers, the type commonly found in medical cotton or high-end cosmetic pads. Interspersed within are molecules of sponge-like polyurethane, which perfectly match the sample of makeup sponge material collected by the police from Ms. Isabella's refuse container." Isabella shrugged, her tone chillingly casual. "I already told you, the child is unwell. She secretly took my personal items to ingest. Children deprived of affection often do crazy things. How was I supposed to monitor her rummaging through the trash?" Isabella's lawyer immediately chimed in. "Doctor determining the material composition only proves the child ingested them. It does not prove my client forced her. This is the spontaneous behavior of a child suffering from Pica syndrome." Lucas clenched his fist, about to interject, but Stone placed a hand on his shoulder, signaling patience. Dr. Aris was unfazed by the interruption. He looked at Isabella over his thick glasses, his eyes sharp as a scalpel. "That is what we initially thought, that the child ingested dry cotton. But when we conducted deeper chemical separation, the results told a completely different story." He pressed the controller to switch to the next slide. A chromatograph chart appeared with one column of red metrics spiking unusually high. "This was not dry cotton," Aris affirmed, his voice hardening. "Chemical analysis shows that every fiber within this mass was deeply saturated with a large quantity of organic compounds." All eyes turned to the expert. The room was deathly quiet. "To put it simply," Dr. Aris continued, turning to look directly at Isabella, "these cotton pieces were thoroughly soaked in concentrated orange juice before being introduced into the body, and not just lightly dipped. The structure of the cotton fibers indicates they were soaked long enough to become soft, breaking down the initial rigid bonds." Isabella began to blink rapidly. Her hands, previously crossed, dropped, her fingers gripping the edge of the metal table. "So what?" Her lawyer tried to salvage the situation. "Perhaps the child enjoyed orange juice and dipped the cotton in it to make it more palatable." "No, counselor." Dr. Aris shook his head, turning to the next page of the documentation. "We cross-referenced this chemical sample with food items found at Ms. Isabella's residence. It completely matches the molecular structure of a specialized weight loss orange juice, the Miracle Tonic, Ms. Isabella often advertises on social media. One bottle of this product costs $200. A 7-year-old child could not independently devise such a complex procedure, purchase the diet tonic, and soak it to the exact ratio to make the cotton pliable like soft candy." Lucas took a step forward, his low voice echoing in the cold room. "It was a false satiety method. Cotton soaked in orange juice would taste sweet, be easy to swallow, and when it reached the stomach, it would swell, deceiving the sensation of hunger while providing a minimal amount of vitamins to prevent the body from immediately wasting away. This is not a child's pathology. This is a meticulously calculated dietary control regimen." "It is torture," Stone added, landing a legal blow. "She forced the child to consume this to maintain a figure, to keep her from complaining of hunger while barely sustaining her." The confidence on Isabella's face shattered piece by piece. She backed away, her lips moving to object, but no words came out. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an exit, but finding only cold, judging stares from every direction. Even her own lawyer was looking down at his notes, his forehead beaded with sweat, realizing the case had hit a dead end. A senior police officer who had been standing silently in the corner of the room stepped forward. The sound of his shoe heels clicking on the floor was distinctly audible. He walked straight toward the trembling, perfect mother, placing a firm but non-aggressive hand on her shoulder. He pulled a new order from his breast pocket, opening it before the terrified woman. Miss Isabella Sterling, based on this new forensic evidence and the recent unofficial admission, we are compelled to immediately change the terms of your custody. Isabella stared at the order, her face utterly drained of color. You are under arrest. The officer drew out the handcuffs. The sharp metallic clinking sound rang out definitively, ending the deceitful performance that had lasted for months. Isabella did not scream or struggle. Monday morning at the New York Supreme Court, the air was heavy as if a storm was brewing. Lucas emerged from the black sedan, instantly surrounded by a wall of cameras and microphones. He wore a dark gray suit, his tie neatly knotted, but his gaunt face and dark circled eyes betrayed weeks of sleepless nights. A crowd of Isabella's supporters gathered outside the police barricades, holding signs with broken hearts and derogatory slogans. Heartless man. Give her daughter back. Money can't buy a mother's love. Lucas bowed his head quickly, moving past the crowd, leaving the jeers behind the heavy revolving doors of the courthouse. He knew today was not just a legal battle. It was a fight to reclaim his honor and his daughter's life. Inside the courtroom, Isabella was already seated at the defense table. The contrast was heartbreaking. She wore a modest beige wool dress, her hair loosely tied back her face, expertly made up to appear pale and frail. She sat there, hands clasped on the table, her shoulders twitching slightly whenever someone looked her way, perfectly embodying the role of a weak single mother being crushed by financial power. The trial began. Isabella was called to the witness stand. She walked slowly, gripping the wooden railing as if she needed support. Her lawyer, a man known for his tactics in manipulating a jury's emotions, began questioning her in a gentle tone. Ms. Sterling, could you explain to the jury the results of the recent forensic examination? About the cotton pads soaked in orange juice. Isabella lightly dabbed a dry corner of her eye with a handkerchief. She took a deep breath, looking toward the jury with a pleading gaze. That was my fault. I admit I was careless in managing my personal supplies. I used those cotton pads and juice for my skincare regimen, but I never imagined Sophie would secretly take them. Why would Sophie do that? The lawyer prompted. The child, she is very lonely, Isabella's voice caught. Lucas is always away. She craves attention. I read psychiatric literature. They say children lacking a father's presence often engage in self-harm or mimic their mother in unhealthy ways to gain attention. Sophie saw me use those items, and she thought if she acted like me, her father would notice her more. She turned to look at Lucas, her eyes filled with painful accusation. I tried to compensate. I spent the entire summer with her cooking healthy meals, but the psychological shadow left by her father's neglect was too immense. The entire courtroom murmured. Pitying glances began to fall on Lucas. Isabella's narrative was too plausible, too emotional. It struck a nerve with the stereotype of millionaires who only care about money. It was the turn of Isabella's lawyer to cross-examine Lucas. The man stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked toward Lucas with an air of superiority. Mr. Sterling, in the past year, how many times have you traveled for business? About 12 times, primarily to London and Tokyo. Lucas answered, his voice low and striving for calm. And how long did each trip last? 1 to 2 weeks. So you were absent from home nearly 6 months out of the year. The lawyer turned to the jury, shrugging. You buy your daughter expensive dolls and designer clothes. But do you know what her favorite color is? Or do you know that she's afraid of the dark? Lucas gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. He knew she liked sky blue. He knew she needed a nightlight, but at this moment, any explanation sounded like a feeble excuse. "I work to secure my daughter's future," Lucas responded, suppressing the rage boiling in his chest. "Secure her future," the lawyer scoffed. "By allowing her to develop a destructive psychological syndrome, Mr. Startling, your neglect is the very cause that drove Sophie down the path of self-destruction. You created a void, and the child filled it with cotton, quite literally." Lucas remained silent. He felt as if he were being nailed to the cross of judgment. He glanced at Isabella. She was looking down, but through the wisps of her hair, Lucas caught a quick smirk, the smile of a victor watching their prey fall into the trap. The jury began to whisper, exchanging disapproving headshakes. The scales of justice were tipping heavily toward the dedicated but unfortunate mother. Lucas felt the air being sucked out of the courtroom, leaving a pressure crushing his chest. He looked for Stone, his lawyer, but Stone's seat was empty. He had asked permission to step out 10 minutes earlier to retrieve a crucial piece of evidence and had not yet returned. The judge looked at the wall clock, lifting his gavel. "If the plaintiff has no further questions, the court will recess for deliberation before issuing a preliminary ruling on custody." Lucas was desperate. If the court stopped here, he would lose Sophie forever. He wanted to stand up to yell at Isabella that she was a liar, but he knew doing so would only worsen the situation. The judge raised the gavel high. At that exact moment, the side door of the courtroom burst open, violently hitting the wall with a dry sound that startled everyone into turning around. Attorney Stone strode in his forehead, lightly beaded with sweat, his tie slightly askew, but his eyes blazing. In his arms, he clutched a worn cardboard box sealed with yellow police tape. "Objection!" Stone shouted, his voice echoing across the room, drowning out the murmurs. "Your Honor, please hold. We have just received a new piece of evidence, an item that will fundamentally change the nature of this case." Stone's abrupt entrance plunged the courtroom into silence. The judge lowered the gavel but did not strike it, pushing his glasses up to look at the box in the lawyer's hand. "Mr. Stone, this is a courtroom, not a stage drama. Where did this evidence originate?" "From the defendant's vehicle, Your Honor. It was overlooked during the initial search and was just located by our investigative team." Stone quickly walked toward the evidence table, placing the box down. "I request permission to open it right here before the jury." H.U. Isabella's lawyer shot up to object, but Stone's unwavering gaze and the jury's palpable curiosity led the judge to nod acceptance. Stone donned white rubber gloves. He carefully cut through the sealed tape. From the box, he pulled out a tattered, worn cloth doll. One eye was missing, and the stitching on its back bore the jagged marks of being cut open and clumsily sewn shut. Isabella, who had maintained her composure until now, suddenly froze. She recognized the doll. Lucas rose, his eyes blazing as he looked directly at his ex-wife, whose complexion was rapidly draining. He knew what was about to happen. "Your Honor," Stone said, holding the doll up high. The defendant argued that little Sophie suffers from pica syndrome, an addiction to ingesting non-food items like cotton. If that were true by the common logic of the disorder, the child would have torn this doll apart to consume the cotton stuffing inside. He paused, observing everyone's reaction, then continued. But Sophie did not do that. She did the opposite. Stone turned the doll's back toward the jury. He took a small utility knife and sliced through the crooked black stitches on the doll's back. He inverted it over the wooden table. Not a single piece of cotton fell out. Instead, dark, moldy fragments tumbled down. A stale piece of chocolate cookie, sticky melted candies fused together, a piece of bread hard as rock, and shriveled fragments of cheese. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Murmurs erupted. Stone set the empty doll down next to the pile of spoiled food, his voice low and deeply emotional. This child was not anorexic. She was not mentally disturbed. She craved actual food. She craved it so badly that she had to hide these crumbs like precious treasure. But she dared not eat them because she was terrified of her mother. She was forced to swallow cotton to stay alive while saving real food for this doll. The large screen in the courtroom lit up. Stone signaled the technician to play a video recording of Sophie's interview at the hospital this morning, conducted under the supervision of a child psychologist. On the screen, Sophie sat on the hospital bed hugging a pillow. Her small, trembling voice rang out, tearing at the hearts of everyone present. Mommy said, eating the fluffy snacks would make me pretty like her. If I ate cookies, I would be ugly, and Daddy wouldn't love me anymore. I didn't want Daddy to hate me, so I gave the doll the cookies instead. Isabella's image as the perfect saintly mother shattered instantly like glass struck by a sledgehammer. Her feigned composure vanished. Isabella leaped to her feet, her face scarlet, veins throbbing in her neck. "Turn it off! Turn it off right now!" she screamed, her voice cracking with panic. "She's lying. That brat is lying. I only wanted what was best for her. I wanted her to be perfect." There, she lunged toward the screen, as if to tear apart the image of her daughter speaking the truth. 2 court officers rushed forward to restrain her. "Let me go. You don't understand. Being heavy is a crime. She is not allowed to be heavy." Isabella's crazed shouting was the most damning admission of guilt. It was no longer carelessness. It was no longer a child's pathology. It was the cruel imposition of a narcissistic mother on her own flesh and blood. The jury did not take long to deliberate. Only 15 minutes later, they returned with a unanimous verdict. The judge slammed the gavel onto the table, the sound sharp and definitive, ending all arguments. The court finds the defendant Isabella Startling guilty of child abuse in the 1st degree, deceit of the court, and neglect of a dependent person. The sentence applied is 15 years in state prison, permanent revocation of parental rights, and a prohibition on all forms of contact with the victim. Bourriti toi. Police immediately approached the defense table. Isabella was still muttering incoherently about weight and appearance. The metallic sound of the handcuffs clicking around her wrists echoed. She struggled, shouting the most profane curses at Lucas as she was dragged out of the courtroom. Lucas remained seated. He showed no sign of satisfaction or joy. Wearily, he slumped forward onto the table, his broad shoulders shaking. The father's tears finally fell. Not tears of victory, but tears of profound relief. His daughter's long, agonizing nightmare had truly ended. He had kept his promise. The crowd in the courtroom slowly dispersed. Stone placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder, a gentle pat instead of congratulations, and quietly gathered his files. Lucas stood up, adjusted his tie, and took a deep breath. He walked out of the courthouse, leaving the swarm of reporters behind him, scrambling for sensational sound bites. He didn't care about them anymore. He walked quickly toward the waiting car at the back exit. Lucas pulled out his phone. The screen displayed a new text message from Martha, who was looking after Sophie at the hospital. "Mr. Startling come home soon. Little madam is waiting for dinner. She asked if Daddy would like chicken soup." A faint warm smile spread across Lucas's drawn face. He put his phone away and opened the car door. "Let's go home," he told the driver. "My daughter is waiting." The old moss-green Ford pickup truck turned onto the gravel road, leaving behind the noise and dust of New York City. 3 months earlier, Lucas Startling had made a decision that stunned the entire corporate board. He sold his Manhattan penthouse, delegated most of his operational responsibilities to subordinates, and moved to the quiet Hudson Valley countryside. He needed space. More importantly, Sophie needed room to breathe. Lucas turned off the engine, stepped out, and took a deep breath of the fresh air, fragrant with dry grass and pine. He loosened his tie, removed it, and casually tossed it onto the passenger seat. His expensive suit jacket met the same fate. Here in this place, he was not a financial shark. He was simply a man trying to relearn fatherhood from the ground up. The screen door opened with a familiar creak. Lucas stepped into the kitchen, rolled up his shirt sleeves past his elbows, and reached for the navy apron hanging on the hook. "Sophie, Daddy's home." There was no immediate reply. Lucas walked quietly into the dining room. Sophie was sitting there at the rustic oak table. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating her golden hair. She looked healthier than she had at the trial, her cheeks faintly pink, but her shoulders were still unconsciously hunched in a defensive posture. In front of Sophie was a steaming bowl of chicken and vegetable soup. Martha had prepared the afternoon meal before leaving, but the soup was untouched. Sophie gripped the silver spoon tightly, her knuckles white. She stared intensely at the carrot slices and egg noodles in the bowl, her eyes flickering with apprehension. It wasn't the look of a picky eater. It was the look of someone facing a minefield, unsure which step would trigger punishment. Lucas paused at the doorway, his heart sinking. The physical scars had healed, but Isabella's manipulative voice in her head remained persistent as a ghost. He didn't step forward to force her to eat. He walked around the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and pulled up a chair opposite her, maintaining a distance that prevented her from feeling pressured. "Smells delicious, doesn't it? Martha always knows how to pick the best carrots." Sophie startled, looking up at Lucas with an expression of guilt. "I'm sorry. I haven't eaten yet." "It's all right. I'm not very hungry either." Lucas smiled gently. He gently pushed Sophie's soup bowl slightly away, creating an open space in front of her. "It's a beautiful day out. The sunshine is like honey. Do you want to come help me in the garden? The cherry tomato patch in the back seems to need some tending." The tension in Sophie's shoulders immediately eased as the topic of food was swept aside. "Tomatoes, are they ripe yet, Daddy?" "I'm not sure." "Why don't we go check? I hear tomatoes like it when children talk to them." Sophie slipped off her chair and took Lucas's large hand. The two walked out to the backyard garden where Lucas had spent the past month working the soil. The afternoon breeze gently lifted Sophie's hair. Lucas handed her a small trowel, perfectly sized for her grip. He knelt beside the loose, rich soil bed, pointing to the vigorously growing tomato plants. "Look, Sophie. Look at their roots." Sophie bent down curiously, touching the white roots firmly attached to the soil. "What are they doing, Daddy?" "They're eating," Lucas explained, scooping up a handful of dark, nutrient-rich dirt. "Plants are just like people. Soil and water are their food. Without food, these roots wouldn't be able to hold on tightly, the stem wouldn't be able to grow tall, and there wouldn't be any ripe red tomatoes for us." Sophie was silent, her fingers tracing a smooth green leaf. "Mommy said, 'Food makes people heavy,'" she murmured, her eyes fixed on the ground. Lucas put the trowel down and turned to face her. He gently lifted Sophie's chin so she looked directly into his eyes. "That's because Mommy never saw a plant grow up, Sophie. Food is not the enemy. Food is fuel, like gasoline for Daddy's truck or batteries for your toys. Do you think this plant is ugly because it's growing big?" Sophie shook her head. "It's beautiful. Its leaves are green and shiny." "That's right, because it's well fed. When you eat, your body uses that strength to help you run faster, jump higher, and laugh louder. It's a gift from nature, not a punishment." The two worked in silence. Sophie carefully mounded soil around the base of each tomato plant, whispering encouragement for them to grow quickly. Lucas watched her, seeing the slight perspiration on her forehead. Physical labor was the best medicine. It helped people reconnect with their bodies, feeling their natural needs genuinely. The sun began to set, and the air grew cool. Sophie stopped working, and her stomach gave a loud growl. She blushed instinctively, clutching her abdomen with her usual reflex, but this time there was no searing pain, only an emptiness demanding to be filled. "Looks like someone's stomach is staging a little protest." Lucas winked. "Working this hard would make even a plant hungry, let alone a person." Sophie looked at her dad, then at the tomato patch. I think I want to go inside." Lucas washed his daughter's hands thoroughly at the outdoor sink. When they returned to the dining table, the soup had cooled. Lucas took it to reheat. The aroma of chicken broth, onions, and herbs once again filled the kitchen, but this time it didn't carry the scent of coercion. It carried the scent of warmth after an afternoon of labor. Lucas placed the soup bowl in front of Sophie. He said nothing, simply sat down next to her and began eating his own portion of buttered toast, making a pleasant crunchy sound. Sophie picked up the spoon. Her hand was still slightly shaky, but her eyes were more resolute. She remembered the white root clinging to the soil. She remembered her dad's words about fuel. 1 spoonful. Sophie put the soup into her mouth. The savory sweetness of the bone broth and the earthiness of the vegetables dissolved on her tongue. She swallowed. No nausea, no mother's screaming reprimand, only warmth spreading from her throat to her stomach. Lucas held his breath, glancing at his daughter from the corner of his eye, his heart pounding in his chest, but outwardly maintaining a calm facade while chewing his toast. Sophie took a second spoonful, then a third. The pace quickened. She ate as if she had just discovered a miracle. Her cheeks plumped as she chewed, her eyes closed in enjoyment. Soon the bowl was empty. Sophie put the spoon down, letting out a long sigh of satisfaction. She leaned back in her chair, her hands resting lightly on her full belly. Lucas stopped eating and turned to face his daughter. "How was that, sweetheart? Are you okay?" Sophie looked up at her dad, the most radiant, genuine smile Lucas had seen in 7 years spreading across her face. Her eyes sparkled with joy, completely devoid of any trace of fear. "Daddy," Sophie said, her voice clear, "my tummy is moving again." Lucas flinched momentarily, the terrifying memory of that rainy night flooding back momentarily stiffening him. But Sophie continued, her small hand rubbing her satisfied belly. "But it's not fighting this time. It says it's very warm. It's dancing because it's happy, Daddy." Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. He reached across the table and firmly grasped his daughter's small hand. The warmth from her hand transferred to him, dispelling all lingering coldness and anxiety. He had won. Not in the courtroom, not against Isabella. He had triumphed over the fear in his daughter's heart. "I'm so happy," Lucas whispered, his voice hoarse. "If it's happy, then I'm happy too." Just then the doorbell rang, breaking the quiet moment between father and daughter. Lucas released her hand, stood up and straightened his shirt. He glanced at the wall clock. Right on time. "Who is it, Daddy?" Sophie asked curiously, her legs swinging under the table. "Some friends who came to help me with something important. You stay here and rest, or go watch cartoons in the living room." "No?" Lucas walked out and opened the door. Standing on the porch were Stone and 2 unfamiliar women in crisp professional attire. In Stone's arms was not the usual briefcase of litigation files. He was holding a thick volume of documents, the cover bearing large blue letters of hope. The Sophie Project. "We're ready, Mr. Sterling." Stone said, his eyes filled with respect. "All legal paperwork for the foundation is complete. We just need your signature." Lucas nodded, opening the door wider to let the afternoon sun flood into the house. "Come in. We have a lot of work to do. There are many hungry hearts out there that need to be heard." Lucas's office at the farm didn't feature soaring glass walls or expensive Italian leather sofas. It had only a large wooden desk, well-stocked bookshelves, and a wide-open window overlooking the meadow. Stone spread the documents across the desk next to Dr. Laura, a leading child psychologist, and Sarah, a lawyer specializing in children's rights. According to this draft, Stone explained his finger tracing the dense lines of text. "You will transfer 40% of your personal stock in the Sterling Corporation as the initial capital endowment. This number, Lucas, are you certain it will cost you absolute veto power in the company?" Lucas picked up his fountain pen without a moment of hesitation. "I have never been more certain, Stone. Money sitting in an account is just lifeless figures. But if it can prevent another child from having to swallow cotton out of fear, then it truly holds value." He signed with a decisive flourish at the bottom of the document. The Sophie Foundation was officially born. "Our goal isn't just legal support," Lucas turned to Dr. Laura. "I want to create a sanctuary. Children in affluent families are often emotionally neglected because people assume they have everything. But emotional abuse, the pressure to be perfect, the destructive diet regimens, they ravage a child's soul more horribly than material deprivation. We have planned the first center. Dr. Laura enthusiastically opened the blueprints. It won't look like a hospital. It will feel like a home, with a kitchen to teach healthy cooking, a garden for them to cultivate, and most importantly, experts who know how to listen to the things they dare not say. 6 months later, the first Sophie Foundation Center was inaugurated in upstate New York. There were no champagne toasts, no red carpets, no A-list celebrities for photo opportunities. The center's doors opened early, welcoming special guests, single mothers struggling with custody battles, shy children hiding behind their parents, and volunteers who had traveled from all over. Lucas stood quietly in the courtyard observing. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a Foundation uniform t-shirt, busy unloading boxes of nutritious food from a delivery truck. And Sophie. She stood in the center of the courtyard, radiant in a bright yellow floral dress like the morning sun. Today's Sophie was no longer the hunched, frightened child in oversized silk garments. She stood tall, her hair pulled into a neat ponytail, her eyes sparkling with confidence. Sophie was managing the cookie and milk station. A boy about her age, thin and timid, stood lingering in front of the counter. He kept staring at the box of cookies, reaching out, and then retracting his hand, glancing around fearfully. Lucas started to step forward to help, but he paused. He wanted to see what his daughter would do. Sophie walked out from behind the counter. She took a package of cookies and approached the boy. He backed up a step, clutching his stomach with his old reflex. "Are you okay?" Sophie asked gently. I'm not hungry." The boy lied, but a loud gurgle from his stomach betrayed him. "My mom said eating this isn't good." Sophie smiled. She tore open the cookie package. The sweet smell of butter spread in the air. She broke off half a cookie and ate it happily in front of the boy. "See, I ate it and I'm fine. This is a magic cookie." "Magic?" The boy was curious, his eyes widening. "Uh-huh." Sophie nodded decisively, offering the remaining half of the cookie to the boy. "My daddy said food is fuel. If you eat it, your tummy will be happy and you'll run as fast as a superhero." The boy looked at the cookie, then at Sophie's smile. Trust spread. He took the cookie and took a small bite, then a larger one. The tension in his face eased. "It's delicious," the boy whispered. "Right, eat it. Your tummy will be so happy it will dance, you'll see." Sophie giggled. Lucas watched the scene from a distance, his chest swelling with an indescribable emotion. It was greater than pride. It was salvation. He had saved his daughter, and now his daughter was using her own painful experience to save other children. Sophie turned, catching her dad's eye. She ran toward Lucas, embracing him tightly. "Did you see Daddy?" "He ate it," Sophie cheered. "Daddy, those kids' tummies need to move happily, like mine too, right?" Lucas knelt down on one knee, brushing the loose strands of hair from her forehead. He looked deep into her clear eyes, nodding firmly. "That's right, my love. And we will work hard to make sure no tummy has to move in fear ever again." He understood that the greatest legacy he would leave behind was not the skyscrapers bearing the Sterling name, but the compassionate heart beating in his daughter's chest. True affection was not about molding children into perfect soulless statues for display, but about nurturing their souls with understanding so they could love themselves and share that warmth with the world. The sun began to dip behind the trees, painting the sky red. The event ended, and people began to depart. "Carry me, Daddy, I'm tired." Sophie nestled her head into his shoulder. "Up you go, princess." Lucas turned. Sophie climbed onto her father's back, wrapping her arms tightly around his neck. Lucas stood up, feeling the precious weight on his back, the weight of responsibility, of love, and of the future. Father and daughter walked toward the parking lot under the radiant sunset. Their shadows stretched long on the dirt road, merging into one. "Daddy," Sophie whispered into his ear. "Yes, my love." "What are we having for dinner tonight? I want more soup." Lucas's hearty laughter echoed in the peaceful space, completely erasing the ghosts of the past. "All right, chicken soup and garlic butter toast too. Your tummy will be dancing all night long." Ahead of them, the road stretched wide, filled with light and hope. And that concludes our bedtime story for today. We hope this journey with Lucas and Sophie, a true testament to parental devotion and resilience, resonated deeply with you. This narrative, a blend of heartwarming stories and truly touching stories, reminds us that the greatest riches in life are not found in bank accounts or grand titles, but in the unwavering love between a parent and child and the courage to fight for what is right. What are your thoughts on Lucas's ultimate choice, prioritizing his daughter's healing over his empire? Did Sophie's final joyful laughter bring a smile to your face? Thank you for staying with us until the very end. May this story serve as a gentle reminder that every child deserves to grow up in an environment where their bodies are fueled by nourishment, not fear, and where their hearts are nurtured by unconditional love, not the cruel pressure of perfection. Go forward and remember the power of authentic care and the beautiful journey of healing. Good night.